is hereby called to order. Senator Juan Miguel Mig Subiri will lead the chamber in prayer.
Let us put ourselves in the presence of the Lord. Dear God our Father, you are the greatest of all and our only salvation. Shine your light upon us. We need you to guide us and be there for us and our loved ones always. Father, bless our countrymen who are deep in sorrow and suffer from disasters by nature, as well as by other men's follies. Bless those who carry heavy physical, financial, emotional, and spiritual burdens. Father, we confess that we often forget to listen to you. We hear other voices and ignore your voice. Dear God, open our minds and hearts so we will follow only your wise, just, gentle, and loving voice. Let us hear and heed your godly counsel as we tackle the tasks you have set before us. Help us make decisions that reflect your unconditional love as we deal with our people's life, liberty, sickness, and death. Grant us discernment that will assist us in legislation, governance, and charitable undertakings. Let our actions today prepare for our countrymen a society of equal opportunity, responsible institutions, justice, and peace for all. Let all these be under the protection of your Holy Spirit, made powerful by your sacrifice, forgiveness, and love. In your holy name, amen.
Amen. The Malayan High School of Science Choir will lead us in the singing of the Philippine National Anthem, and then they will also render a song entitled Isang Dugo, Isang Lahi, Isang Musika. Secretary, please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Hontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Suveri, Senate President Pimentel.
With 20 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 69th session, Wednesday, March 1, and consider the same as approved.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, we'd like to acknowledge the presence of guests in the gallery. We have the guests of Senator Subiri from the Sultanate of Batangas, Sultan Faisal Bansao and Dr. Fatani Abdul Malik. Guests are from Mater Ecclesiae School of San Pedro Laguna, headed by Sor Emma Badajos and Sor Maria Lenita S. Rivera. Visitors of Senator Ontiveros, the Industrial Global Union, the Lagablab Network, and the guests of Senator Pacquiao, students from the Meiji University of Tokyo, Japan. I would like to welcome them to the Senate, Mr. President.
Welcome to all of our guests and visitors.
Mr. President, before I move to proceed with the reference of business to avail of the presence of the members of the Senate, I move to consider for third reading Senate Bill 1305 under Committee Report number 29.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
May we request the Secretary to read the title of the measure.
An act increasing the maternity leave period to 120 days for female workers in government service and the private sector, with an option to extend for an additional 30 days without pay, providing a parental leave period for adoptive parents, and granting an additional 30 days for solo mothers and for other purposes.
Mr. President, printed copies of the measure were distributed last February 28, 2017, thereby complying with the 3-day rule. I therefore move to vote on third and final reading, Senate Bill 1305, through a roll call vote.
Are our colleagues ready to vote? Can we give this exercise your utmost attention? So there's a motion for us to vote on third reading. Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Maternity leave.
Secretary,
Maternity leave.
roll call vote for Senate Bill number 1305.
The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, De Lima, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Hontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Suveri, Senate President Pimentel.
22 affirmative votes, 0 negative, no one abstained. Senate Bill number 1305 is approved on third reading.
Good. Mr. President, I move that we recognize the President Pro Temp, Senator Ralph Recto, to explain his vote.
Senator Recto will explain his vote.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, my dear colleagues, a wag once said that if men were to get pregnant, maternity leave would last for 2 years with full pay. And morning sickness would rank as the nation's #1 health problem. Hopefully, the passage of this bill won't lead to the mass agitation by menfolk for parity, as parental leave today is a short 7 days. But there's a good reason for that, Mr. President. Maternity is a matter of fact. Paternity, however, is a matter of opinion. Seriously, I hail this bill for the many bests it brings out of this institution. It is a fruit of bipartisan push. It is a testament to our ability to multitask, that we can conduct high-profile investigations. At the same time, we quietly craft wise legislation. It is a demonstration of the Senate tradition to champion progressive laws. In whatever era, whenever the Senate pushes the envelope, the status quo pushes back. But in the case of this bill, any hostility, if any, from business and capital is answered by the exemptions that this bill provides. Leeway is given to distressed companies, to retail and service companies with less than 10 employees, to micro businesses whose total assets do not exceed 3 million, to firms who are already giving the same benefits. The rationale for this is simple. Maternity benefits should be calculated in a way that should not cause businesses to abort their operations, especially businesses still in incubation. This bill is past its due date. This should have been delivered a long time ago. On the macro level, longer maternity leaves do not harm the economy. On the micro level, longer maternity leaves make both the baby and the mother healthy and happy. And the father, in many aspects, benefits too. On this, there is one innovative section in the bill worth mentioning. Under Section 6, a mother entitled to maternity leave benefits may opt to allocate up to 30 days of said leave credits to the father of the child, whether they are married or not. This is the best pass-a-load app ever invented, and a fair one too, as it does not impose the burden of matrimony. I can sense that this section was inspired by that line in Nancy Smith's famous poem, which says, "For every woman who feels tied down by her children, there is a man who is denied the full pleasures of shared parenthood." Let me further extol some of the related provisions. One is that if the father of the child is absent or incapacitated, the leave credits can be transferred to a qualified caregiver. Another is that a solo mother is entitled to 30 more days of maternity leave. Mr. President, my dear colleagues, birthing progressive legislation has always been marked by resistance and attended by pain. And when it comes to laws that affect women, the gestation is counted not in trimesters but in years. Filipinas only got the right to vote 70 years ago on April 13, 1937. After years of struggle, marked by defeats by our brave suffragettes, and the country even had to hold a national plebiscite to ratify a right that was basically theirs. 2 years later, in 1939, the 8-hour workday law was passed. And in 1941 came the first maternity benefits law, the Commonwealth Act 647. Both have to hurdle opposition, vilification even, and the breakthrough came only after tireless campaign by labor and women's groups who have to fend off criticisms that both laws were radical. But the ensuing years would later uphold as reasonable and fair and just what was seen as radical then. Mr. President, my dear colleagues, any step that lightens the burden for women and lights the path for the full development of their being benefits humanity. Husbands, brothers, fathers, and sons too. As Nancy Smith in the same poem beautifully said, "For every woman who takes a step toward her own liberation, there is a man who finds the way to freedom has been made a little easier." I vote yes to this bill. I congratulate the sponsor. I call for its early signing by the President. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to consider for third reading Senate Bill 462 under Committee Report Number 16.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
May we ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure? 462.
An act regulating the practice of speech language pathology in the Philippines, providing funds therefore and for other purposes.
Mr. President, printed copies of the measure were distributed last March 1, 2017, thereby complying with the 3-day rule. I therefore move to vote on third and final reading, Senate Bill 462, through a roll call vote.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved. Secretary, please conduct the roll call vote for Senate Bill number 462.
The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano, De Lima, Trilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Hontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Subiri, Senate President Pimentel.
20 affirmative votes, 0 negative votes, no abstention. Senate Bill number 462 is approved on third reading.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved. Secretary, let's go to the reference of business.
Message from the House of Representatives. Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 27 February 2017 it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. 4903 entitled An Act Simplifying the Donor's Tax Rate, amending for the purpose Section 99 of the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended.
Referred to the Committee on Ways and Means.
2924, an act creating a barangay to be known as Barangay Cristo Rey in the municipality of Capas, province of Tarlac. 3839, an act creating a barangay to be known as Barangay North Signal Village in the city of Taguig, Metro Manila. 3840, an act creating a barangay to be known as Barangay South Signal Village in the city of Taguig, Metro Manila. 3841, an act creating a barangay to be known as Barangay Central Signal Village in the city of Taguig, Metro Manila. 3842, an act creating a barangay to be known as Barangay North Daang Hari in the city of Taguig, Metro Manila. 3843, an act creating a barangay to be known as Barangay South Daang Hari in the city of Taguig, Metro Manila. 3844, an act creating a barangay to be known as Barangay Central Bikutan in the city of Taguig, Metro Manila. 3845, an act creating a barangay to be known as Barangay New Lower Bikutan in the city of Taguig, Metro Manila. 3848, an act creating a barangay to be known as Barangay Katuparan in the city of Taguig, Metro Manila. 3849, an act creating a barangay to be known as Barangay Tanyag in the city of Taguig, Metro Manila. 3850, an act creating a barangay to be known as Barangay San Miguel in the city of Taguig, Metro Manila.
To the Committees on Local Government and Electoral Reforms and People's Participation.
4848, an act establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in the city of Bislig, province of Surigao del Sur, and appropriating funds therefore. 4850, an act establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in the municipality of Lopez, province of Quezon, and appropriating funds therefore. 4851, an act establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in the municipality of Atimunan, province of Quezon, and appropriating funds therefore. 4852, an act establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in the municipality of Gumaca, province of Quezon, and appropriating funds therefore. 4853, an act establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in the municipality of Barubo, province of Surigao del Sur, and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Agriculture and Food and Finance.
Communications. Letter from the National Irrigation Administration dated 17 January 2017, submitting to the Senate the Calendar Year 2016 Fourth Quarter Progress Report for Agrarian Reform Infrastructure Support Project.
-3.
-3.
To the Committee on Agrarian Reform.
Letter from the National Economic and Development Authority dated 24 January 2017, submitting to the Senate the list of foreign retailers selling high-end or luxury goods pursuant to Section 8 of Republic Act Number 8762, otherwise known as the Retail Trade Liberalization Act of 2000.
To the Committees on Trade, Commerce and Entrepreneurship and Economic Affairs.
Letter from the Calapan Waterworks Corporation dated 8 February 2017, submitting to the Senate the operational report for year 2016 pursuant to Section 10 of Republic Act Number 1985.
To the Committee on Public Services.
Additional reference of business, bills on first reading. Senate Bill Number 1359, an act amending Articles 180, 183, and 184 of Act Number 3815, otherwise known as the Revised Penal Code as amended, increasing the penalties thereof, criminalizing subornation of perjury, and for other purposes. Senator Laila de Lima.
To the Committee on Justice and Human Rights.
1360, an act amending Section 11 of Republic Act Number 3019, otherwise known as the Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act as amended. Senator Laila de Lima.
To the Committee on Justice and Human Rights.
1361, an act amending Section 2 of Act Number 3326, otherwise known as an act to establish periods of prescription for violations penalized by special acts and municipal ordinances, and to provide when prescription shall begin to run. Senator Laila de Lima.
To the Committee on Justice and Human Rights.
Resolutions. Resolution number 309, resolution calling for the continued suspension of Oplan Tokhang Project Double Barrel within in view of its complete cessation. Senator Risa Ontiveros.
To the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs.
310, resolution directing the Committees on Public Order and on Health and Demography to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the killing of former Dr. Tode Barrio and current Municipal Health Officer of Sapad, Lanao del Norte, Dr. Dreyfus Bolivar Perlas, with the end in view of enacting measures to ensure the safety and well-being of physicians and other medical personnel in rural areas. Senator Risa Ontiveros.
To the Committees on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs and Health and Demography. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders. Senate Bill 1355 under Committee Report Number 42.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
With the permission of the Chamber, I move to consider Senate Bill 1355 under Committee Report 42.
Any objection? There being none, Senate Bill number 1355 under Committee Report number 42 is under consideration.
May I ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure?
An act adopting innovation as vital component of the country's development policies to drive inclusive development, promote the growth and national competitiveness of micro, small and medium enterprises, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes.
Mr. President, to sponsor the measure, may we ask the Chairman of the Committee on Energy, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, be recognized. Afterwards, Senator Loren Legarda will co-sponsor the measure. Senator Gatchalian to sponsor the measure, Mr. President.
Maraming salamat.
Can I ask our colleagues to give Senator Gatchalian our undivided attention? So Senator Gatchalian is hereby recognized.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Good afternoon, Mr. President and esteemed colleagues. Allow me to introduce this presentation with a real-life anecdote that could perfectly weave the history and the vision that has inspired the passage of this legislation, the Philippine Innovation Act. This is Diosdado Banato, the son of a poor farmer and a homemaker. He was born and raised in a rural area in the municipality of Igig, Cagayan Valley. Growing up in poverty, he went to school without shoes. His family had no access to electricity. Today, his net worth is estimated at about $5 billion, as he also sits on the big chair of a multi-billion-dollar company in Silicon Valley. This company invests in semiconductors and semiconductor-related technology. Perhaps the easiest way to explain Dado's journey from Cagayan Valley to Silicon Valley is to attribute it to a computer chip, that first single-chip graphical user interface accelerator that made computers work a lot faster without the large boards. These chips can be found in every PC today, just as Banato's name is found in the Computer History Museum in Mountain Valley, California, as pioneer of the first PC chipset. While most people refer to these chips as his invention, Dado says that it is more appropriate to refer to them as his innovation. He explains that innovation is more important because innovation implies that you are putting together a whole bunch of other elements beyond one invention. Dado's life inspires the Filipino, especially the innovators of today. As he would himself say, my story could be your story. As Filipinos, it must be our story. The Philippine Innovation Act carries that much needed innovation vision to inspire the commitment and cooperation of the government, industry, educational, academic, research and scientific institution, and the rest of the community towards building an innovation economy that will change the economic narrative of our country. A few days ago, I met a group of innovation advocates. One of them was Dado Banato, and together we envisioned how this legislation could put innovation at the center of our national development policies and make innovation a major driver of economic development that will build the foundation of a more inclusive future. We therefore made it an overarching objective of this act to generate and scale up the promotion of innovation in all levels and all areas of national development through the following areas of endeavor. 1, promote a culture of strategic planning and innovation to encourage creative thinking and knowledge creation. 2, improve the country's innovation governance and compel the adoption of a long-term vision and focus priorities for innovation. 3, ensure the effective coordination and eliminate the fragmentation of innovation policies and programs at all levels. 4, remove obstacles to innovation by eliminating bureaucratic hurdles. 5, strengthen partnership among different actors, from the public and private sectors to the academe, the micro, small, and medium enterprises, the research and development institutions, and our communities towards improving the quality of life through innovation. 6, strengthen the position of MSMEs in the innovation system in order to stimulate business ambitions and encourage entrepreneurial behavior. And finally, 7, explore, promote, and protect the potentials of innovation of traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions and genetic resources. In the Global Innovation Index report of 2016, the Philippines ranked 74th among 128 economies in terms of overall innovation, garnering a score of 31.8 out of 100. This is a slight improvement from our 83rd place ranking out of the 141 economies in 2015, with a score of 31.1. In this 2016 GII report, the country also ranked 5th out of the 7 ASEAN economies that are included in the survey. It ranked higher than Cambodia and Indonesia, but lagged behind Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam. The Philippines' relatively low ranking was pulled down by weakness in human capital and research, with a score of 27 out of 100. The score was brought about by low public and private expenditure on education and research and development, as well as low tertiary inbound mobility. While the Philippines has shown an increasing trend in R&D spending, the percentage of its R&D expenditures to GDP at 0.4% still falls below the UNESCO norm of 1% for R&D expenditure to GDP for developing countries. For comparison with other ASEAN countries, R&D expenditure to GDP is 0.19% in Vietnam, 0.36% in Thailand, 1.09% in Malaysia, and 2.0% in Singapore. In terms of S&T human researchers, the country's number of researchers is equivalent to 270 researchers per million population, which is also below the UNESCO norm, which is 380 per million population. From 2015 to 2016, the Philippines registered an improvement by being ranked 47th among 144 countries in the Global Competitive Index of the World Economic Forum. However, steady improvements were also made by our neighboring countries. Hence, we still lag behind economies like Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia. The same report also ranked the Philippines 68 in terms of technological readiness and 48 in terms of innovation factors. And yet another global ranking in 2016, which looks specifically at the country's total impact on global innovation. The Philippines ranked 47 among 56 economies, assessed in a report by the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. This report focused on the extent to which a country's innovation policies generate benefits for the global innovation system. These survey results offer nothing more but compelling evidence on the need for more vigorous action to stimulate a thriving and growth-fueling national innovation system. Such is the purpose of this legislation. In fact, there is no better timing for the passage of this bill than now. Under Ambition 2040, innovation is identified as one of the three major components of fostering economic growth, along with infrastructure and competition. The recently approved Philippine Development Plan 2017 to 2022 likewise identifies innovation as one of the major components of fostering economic growth. Under Chapter 14, entitled Vigorously Advancing Science, Technology, and Innovation, the latest Philippine Development Plan aims to increase the country's growth potential by graduating into a knowledge economy where technology adoption will be promoted and innovation will be stimulated. This is in recognition of the important role that STI continues to play in the country's economic and social progress. In the past 6 years, for example, STI has proven landmark solutions to our problems through the Project NOAA, the nationwide flood hazard and resource mapping using LiDAR, and the launch into space of the country's first microsatellite, Diwata-1, which was designed, developed, and assembled by Filipino researchers and engineers under the guidance of Japanese experts. The new Philippine Development Plan emphasizes that it is very critical to mobilize all the actors in the innovation ecosystem to collaborate and translate the results of research activities into tangible products and services for the people. Consistent with this development goal, under the new Philippine Development Plan, the Philippine Innovation Act will steer the adoption of a clear and inspiring long-term view of the country's innovation vision, improve the governance framework for innovation, and mandate key reform areas toward building a thriving and inclusive national innovation ecosystem. For the Philippines, the challenge does not stop at clearly defining the vision upon which our innovation thrust and strategies will be rooted. Setting the national innovation agenda is another key element of the national innovation system, which in other countries is a task done by a National Innovation Council. A study by Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, or the ITIF, states that about 50 economies have established National Innovation Foundation or enterprises that are specifically charged with promoting innovation. This ITIF table lists 30 out of the more than 50 countries throughout the world that have created governments chartered entities specifically charged with promoting innovation. The establishment of our own National Innovation Council under Section 9 of this proposed act is necessitated by our highly fragmented formal governance system, where numerous agencies are charged with carrying the respective parts of the innovation mandate. The NIC will facilitate horizontal interaction and consultation with stakeholders beyond the official circle of government functionaries, avoiding too much focus on top-down planning that stifles broad-based participation in the development of the National Innovation Agenda. It will develop the country's innovation goals, priorities, and long-term national strategy. Its proposed structure is guaranteed to be well supported by broad expert advice, with adequate authority to harmonize interagency roles and contribute to the National Innovation Agenda. Under Section 6 of this Act, the NIC shall develop a National Innovation Agenda and Strategy document. Such document will establish the country's vision and long-term goals for innovation and provide a roadmap and the strategies for improving innovation governance through clear-cut delineation and complementation of innovation efforts across agencies. The goal must be to deepen and accelerate innovation efforts, especially inclusive innovation programs that target the poorest of the poor and integrate public-private partnership with those of large businesses, MSMEs, academia, and R&D and E institutions. In developing the agenda, the NIC shall identify strategies to stimulate regional capacity for development, take into consideration the competitive advantages and strengths of each province, region, and community. The agenda and strategy shall have a minimum horizon of 10 years, subject to periodic reviews. It will be developed in consultation with government agencies, regional development councils, local government units, and other stakeholders. The bill has identified vital areas that shall be considered in developing the country's priorities for innovation. The NIC is also tasked to administer an innovation fund under Section 2 of this Act, from which grants will be issued to strengthen entrepreneurship and enterprises engaged in developing innovative solutions benefiting the poorest of the poor. Since a successful national innovation system will require collaborative governance, it is vital that a whole-of-government approach is adopted in laying down the foundations and setting the long-term goals, priorities, strategies, and policies, and in delivering the country's innovation programs. This will strengthen our innovation ecosystem, improve policy coherence, and allow innovation to unlock the potential of more inclusive, stronger growth. Thus, under Section 13 of this Act, the NIC will adopt strategies that promote regional innovation to harness the competitive advantages and potential strength of regions and provinces. Cluster policies or strategies shall also be adopted by the NIC as a significant component of the country's innovation policy picks. The cluster policy shall be adopted to focus on regional hubs, provinces, or sectors such as MSMEs, large firms, spin-offs and startups, academic or educational institutions, and research centers. Under Section 12, the internationalization and participation in the local and global value chains of MSMEs are specifically promoted. The NIC is tasked to develop a comprehensive support program to push the growth of MSMEs through innovation. In the Philippines, where 99.6% of businesses are considered MSMEs, the role of innovation cannot be overemphasized. Unlike large companies that have ready access to funding and resources, MSMEs are at a disadvantage because of their size and problems of access to resources and markets. Innovation will enhance these MSMEs' global competitiveness. On the whole, what this legislation intends to achieve is to make innovation a major driver of economic growth and a key foundation of a more inclusive future. It compels us to place innovation at the center of our development policies to enable the country to move as a coherent whole. We cannot anymore afford to take half steps or sporadic efforts in our bid to fuel sustainable and inclusive growth. We need to finally develop a culture of innovation that will propel our nation to an economic success. Last but not the least, I would like to thank Senator Lauren Legarda for spearheading the passage of the Philippine Innovation Act. This legislation will change the rules of the game. A Filipino with an innovative idea will no longer have to look elsewhere for support. This will not only transform our country to an economic powerhouse, it can also turn innovators into patriots. Thank you, Mr. President. Maraming salamat po.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, to co-sponsor the measure, may we recognize Senator Lauren Legarda.
Is there any objection? There being none, Senator Legarda is recognized to co-sponsor the measure.
Pwede. Thank you, Mr. President. I really wish to thank Senator Sherwin Gatchalian for hearing this bill, which I principally authored, and which is actually the byproduct of much consultation and the outcome of our hosting of the APEC. And this is an original measure that I hope will bring back our economy to what it was decades ago. So I thank Sherwin for his stewardship and timely sponsorship of Senate Bill 1355 as endorsed by Committee Report number 42. Honestly, I did not expect that this measure will immediately merit his kind consideration and would sponsor it at such a short time. So I'm really grateful to the sponsor and the chairman of the Committee on Economic Affairs. Having said that, I would just like to say my piece on the importance of this measure. The Philippines has had the enviable status of being the second most progressive nation in Asia during the 1950s and early 1960s. Our country, as you know, was a model of development second only to Japan. We were envied as an industrial powerhouse and served as a manufacturing hub for many products, from consumer goods to medical products, cement, textile, and fertilizers, as well as steel for shipbuilding. We assembled automobiles, television, and home appliances. Technology and capital from multinational enterprises during this period could have helped develop our inherent capacity for indigenous innovation. But that did not happen. Today, the Philippines ranks 74th out of 128 countries on a range of global innovation indexes that include institutional environment, human capital and research, infrastructure, business sophistication, knowledge and technology outputs, and creative outputs. The Information Technology and Innovation Foundation classified the Philippines as, and I quote, an innovation follower, meaning we do not contribute significantly to the global innovation system. It also means we underinvest in scientific research and are not willing to embrace needed reforms that could bolster our innovation potential. Being a mere follower is simply unacceptable. The Filipino talent has contributed a number of game-changing solutions to the world, including the first graphics accelerator chip for personal computers invented by Dado Banatao, which allowed data processing to happen at the speed of light. The medical incubator invented in 1941 by Dr. Fe del Mundo, which continues to save millions of infant lives every day. The video phone invented in 1955 by Gregorio Sara, which paved the way for the camera in our mobile phones today. The development of 9 rice breeds in 1966 by Dr. Rodolfo Aquino helped prevent famine in much of Asia and helped make Thailand and Vietnam the world's leading rice producers, a spot once solely occupied by the Philippines. The moon buggy invented in 1968 by Eduardo San Juan, then a project leader for NASA in the buggy development, and so much more. These outstanding achievements, long delivered before other economies achieved their economic status today, show that if we put in place a firm and explicit commitment to innovation, we can turn things around. More recently, a 15-year-old Filipino-Canadian student, Anne Macosinks, inspired by her friend's difficult plight as a student in a village without electricity in Mindanao, developed a flashlight that generates light from body heat. There are numerous inspiring stories from other countries. South Korea's transformation from a country in ruins after the war into one of the richest economies in the world today is rooted in its systemic approach to building a knowledge-based innovation economy. The Research and Innovation Council of Finland, headed by its Prime Minister, plays a crucial high-level role in coordinating education, research, science and technology, and innovation policies. More than 50 other countries have similar innovation councils. We have none. Taiwan has 19 state-created research institutes that contribute to designing and implementing industrial policy. The Research Institute holds more than 14,571 patents, and its personnel produce an average of 5 new patents every day. Canada, guided by its goal of becoming the most innovative country in the world by 2030, adopted the model of networked clusters. Specializations within localized industries are fostered through collaboration among universities, SMEs, and government. The Philippines, on the other hand, has 32 laws related to science, technology, and innovation. At least 15 agencies pursue their respective innovation programs with very weak coordination. In fact, that's what I always say in every hearing every year, that there is lack of coordination and convergence between and among government agencies. The recently adopted Ambisyon Natin 2040 has identified innovation as one of 3 major components of fostering economic growth, along with infrastructure and competition. Innovation efforts, however, can no longer be directed at broad national development outcomes. We need a well-defined, explicit vision for the country that places innovation in the context of where we want to be in the mid to long term. Our innovation agenda needs to transcend the term of political administrations. These measures will help fulfill all that, together with improving innovation governance. It will help create an ecosystem that facilitates and supports innovation and entrepreneurial growth in cooperation with all stakeholders, including academia and business. It will support inventors so that intellectual theft against the likes of Dr. Abelardo Aguilar, who discovered erythromycin in 1949, will not happen again. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, the proposed Philippine Innovation Act is about making strategic, reasoned priorities. I enjoin you to support Senator Sherwin Gatchalian and this representation and kindly support this measure. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Angara.
Just a manifestation, Mr. President. I'd like to congratulate and thank the Chairman of the Committee on Economic Affairs and the Chairperson of the Committee on Finance, Senator Gatchalian and Senator Legarda. I'd like to associate myself with this measure as a co-sponsor, if they would accept, because I do believe that knowledge and innovation is the biggest single creator of wealth in the last 10 or 15 years of the world economy, Mr. President. If we look at the top companies now, they were non-existent 10 or 15 years ago. If we look at countries as mentioned as Korea, but if we look at India, for example, Mr. President, India is now taking millions of its population out of poverty by having invested in R&D over the last 10 or 15 years. So I would like to associate myself with this measure and congratulate my colleagues. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Senator Zubiri is raising his hand, Majority Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. With the permission of the Majority Floor
Yes.
Leader,
Senator Zubiri,
could
go
I
ahead.
also be made co-sponsor of the sponsor and chairpersons of both Committee on Economic Affairs and Committee on Finance accept. Myself, together with Senator Villar, would like to co-sponsor, made co-author, as well as Senator Joel Assis asked me to mention his name. As chairman of the Committee on Trade and Industry, we fully support this measure. Also, Senator
Senator-
Nancy Binay, Senator Grace Poe, and Senator Bam Aquino would like to be co-sponsors, with the permission of the Majority Floor Leader. And Senator Dick Gordon, who was just...
How do we proceed, Majority Leader, with this numerous requests to be co-authors?
We have no objection, Mr. President, we'll take note of the manifestation.
So all the manifestations are noted.
Thank you. Mr. President, to give the other members of the Senate time to study the proposed measure, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1355 under Committee Report Number 42.
Any objection? Hearing none, we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 1355.
Mr. President, may we suspend the session for a few minutes to accommodate our foreign guests to have a few words with the Senate President. Move to suspend the session.
What's the pleasure of Senator Aquino? It's
I'm
okay?
just getting ready for the next agenda, Mr.
Okay,
President.
so
Of course,
any objection? There being none, session is suspended for a few minutes. Senator Pacquiao?
No, it's okay. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1277 under Committee Report Number 19.
Any objection? There being none, we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1277.
Mr. President, this is the Free Internet Access Act. The parliamentary status of the measure is, we've started with the individual amendments. And the sponsor has introduced his own individual amendments. We therefore move to open the continuation of the period of individual amendments and recognize the sponsor, Chairman of the Committee on Science and Technology, Senator Bam Aquino.
Any objection as to the parliamentary status? There being none, so we are now in the period for individual amendments. Senator Aquino is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, for the record, we shall use the amended copy of SBN 1277 as of February 27, 2017. These individual amendments were done in consultation with Senator Laila de Lima, and I'm adopting them as my own. On page 2, Mr. President, line 1, at the beginning of the sentence, insert the phrase, within 1 year from the effectivity of this act, comma. So moved, Mr. President.
Comma, then the DICT is tasked. Is that how it
Yes,
will be?
Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
On page 3, line 15, after the word NTC, add a new proviso to read as follows, semicolon, provided further that the NTC may not withdraw the use of the available and unassigned spectrum without a minimum of 1 year prior notice to the DICT. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 3, line 10, Mr. President, after the word facilities, add a new sentence to read as follows. Any violation of said prohibition shall subject the concerned government officials and employees to administrative penalties under existing civil service laws, rules, and regulations. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 3A, after line 22, add a new paragraph which shall read as follows. Any collection, processing, and storage of data shall be in accordance with the provisions of Republic Act number 10173, otherwise known as the Data Privacy Act. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 3A, line 31, delete the word "and", replace it with a comma. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 31A, add the phrase "and the National Privacy Commission." So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
That's all, Mr. President. Thank you.
Mr. President, the President Pro Tem, Senator Recto and Senator Zubiri have their own individual amendments on the measure, so I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1277.
What's the pleasure of Senator Subiri?
Yes, Mr. President. Mine, unfortunately, I'm a bit late on the amendments. Not to harass the good sponsor because I support free Wi-Fi internet access. It's just that over the weekend, and if it's all with the permission of the majority floor leader, over the weekend I had a meeting with several public interest groups on the effects of EMF, electromagnetic frequencies on radiation, poisoning, cancers that's being caused by particular emitters. So it was cause for alarm for me, especially that I have small kids and they're the ones most affected by these types of cancers. So if it will be the permission of the gentleman and the sponsor, Senator Bamakino, tomorrow, maybe I'll be coming up with certain amendments to make sure that the area or scope is limited. It is not blasted out on a particular area like a public library or a park where everyone will be receiving the EMF radiation, but maybe just allowing a small particular area of a park where people can go to with warning signs that say that this is a Wi-Fi designated area, and it could be possibly hazardous to your health if you continue to utilize or stay in this particular area. If it's all right with a good sponsor.
Mr. President, just for the record, I think that group also spoke to us, and that was the subject of some of my amendments in the previous week in addressing some of their concerns. But of course, we would be very happy to accept Senator Zubiri's further amendments on the matter tomorrow.
What I can do, Mr. President, is probably get the amendments already given or already included by the good sponsor, and it might not be necessary that I make amendments tomorrow. It's just that I made a commitment to this group that we will look into this before we pass it on second and third reading. Thank you, Mr. President.
We welcome that, Mr. President.
Okay, so we go back to the motion of the majority leader to suspend consideration
Thank you.
of Senate Bill number 1277 under Committee Report number 19. Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1279 under Committee Report 21.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
This is the Pagkaing Pinoy para sa Batang Pinoy Act. Parliamentary status of the measure is we already started with the individual amendments. May we therefore move to open the continuation of the period of individual amendments and recognize the sponsor, Chairman of the Committee on Science and Technology, Senator Bamakino.
Any objection? Hearing none, we are now in the period for individual amendments, and Senator Aquino is recognized.
Mr. President, we shall be using the amended copy of SBN 1279 as of February 22, 2017, for the record, Mr. President. These individual amendments were drafted in collaboration with Senator Honasan. First, Mr. President, on page 1A, line 8, after the word regulations, add a new proviso to read as follows, semicolon, provided further that should the school-based feeding program have the capacity to expand, the DepEd shall coordinate with the concerned local government unit to include severely wasted and stunted children below 5 years of age. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 2, line 27, after the words local government unit, add a new sentence to read as follows, severely wasted and stunted children under 5 years of age listed in the National Nutrition and Poverty Information System shall be included in the feeding program by the concerned local government unit. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, some typos. On the same page, line 18, delete the word basis and replace it with basic.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Another one, Mr. President, on page 3, line 16D, delete the word central and replace it with centralized.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Mr. President, the following amendments are in coordination with Senator Zubiri. On page 3A, line 29, before the word producers, insert the words farmers, comma, fisherfolk, comma. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 29D, after the word based, insert the words farmers, comma, fisherfolk, comma. So moved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 33, before the word producers, insert the words farmers, comma, fisherfolk, comma, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
That's all, Mr. President. Maraming salamat for your patience. Thank you.
Mr. President, Senator Recto will be introducing amendments, so I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1279 under Committee Report 21.
Senator Villar wants to be recognized. What's the pleasure of Senator Villar?
President, I just want to make a manifestation that I will be introducing amendments also. Can you please wait for our amendments?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. So the motion is to suspend consideration of the measure. Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the permission of the Chamber, I move to resume consideration of House Bill 4631 under Committee Report number 36.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the measure renewing for another 25 years the franchise of GMA Network. Parliamentary status of the measure is that we have already started the period of individual amendments. So I move to open the continuation of the period of individual amendments.
Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved. We are now in the period of individual amendments.
Mr. President, I move to recognize the Chairman of the Committee on Public Services, Senator Grace Poe,
Senator-
and to introduce individual amendments, the Senate President Pro Tem, Senator Ralph Recto.
Senator Poe is recognized as well as Senator Recto.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with the permission of the body and to the distinguished chair, may I move for an amendment of my original amendment, and that is with respect to the inclusion of a tax provision in the proposed GMA franchise renewal. It is a minor cosmetic or a style amendment, Mr. President. On page 5, lines 11D to 11E, after the word under, delete the phrase the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997. On the same page, line 11F, after the number 8424, insert the phrase otherwise known as the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997. Okay? On the same page, lines 11F to 11G, after the word amended and comma, delete the phrase the Local Government Code of 1991. On the same page, line 11G, after the number 7160 and comma, insert the phrase otherwise known as the Local Government Code of 1991. It's just a minor cosmetic amendment, Mr. President.
Yeah. We accept, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, the amendment is approved.
Mr. President, I move to close the period of individual amendments.
Any objection? Hearing none, we close the period of individual amendments.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading House Bill 4631 under Committee Report Number 36.
Any motion? Any objection? Hearing none, so House Bill number 4631 under Committee Report Number 36 is approved on second reading.
Mr. President, with the permission of the Chamber, I move to resume consideration of House Bill 4637 under Committee Report Number 43.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, this is the measure extending for another 25 years the franchise to Smart Communications Incorporated. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we're in the period of interpellation. So therefore move to recognize the sponsor, Senator Grace Poe, Chairman of the Committee on Public Services, and to interpellate.
Interpellate. Interpellate ka.
Senator Soto, Cayetano, and Ontiveros, but I will give way to the lady, Mr. President, Senator Ontiveros first.
So, the motion is to recognize sponsors. So Senator Poe is recognized and to interpellate Senator Ontiveros. Kala ko mag-interpellate. Ikaw na? Support. Out. Pero parang, out. Ano ba? Tanong natin. How to force.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would my good sister in the Senate be willing to take some clarificatory questions, also preparatory to my proposing amendments at the proper time?
It will be my pleasure to answer the question of a very honorable, brave woman from Capiz.
Yes, that's correct, Madam Sponsor. That's one of the provinces I'm from. Thank you so much, Mr. President and Madam Sponsor. I have questions on about 7 issues, which I started to raise during the hearing, and which I indicated to the good sponsor I'd pursue an interpellation and then proposed amendments. Ay, sige, excuse me. Okay po. Maraming salamat po. So first, Madam Sponsor, on the 30% public offering requirement. So SMART had 25 years to offer at least 30% of its shares to the public in compliance with the terms of its original franchise. Yet, until today, it has not done so. In this regard, our Committee on Public Services has recommended that House Bill 4637 be approved by the Senate with amendments. And among these amendments is that SMART comply with the 30% public ownership requirement within a period of 2 years. So my question, Madam Sponsor, is that what guarantee could we have in the renewed franchise that SMART will, this time around, comply with this requirement?
We retained the original provision in its franchise, RA 7294, to publicly list. Now, but to compel them is a matter that should be dealt with by the administrative agencies concerned, such as the NTC and SEC. If the good senator would like to amend this provision and perhaps add more teeth to it in the form of adding a penalty, well, we would like to hear your proposed amendments to it.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. In fact, on the good sponsor's mention of the Securities and Exchange Commission, I do recall that SEC has a position paper, in fact, stating that there must be compliance with this 30% public ownership requirement.
Mr.
And-
President, I think
yes,
that the
Mr.
SEC did not
President.
want to make a definite statement on this. I don't think they really said that that they should comply. They just gave their opinion on other matters regarding it.
Perhaps I should have been more precise, Mr. President, but my information is that the SEC presented this position paper to the House during their hearings on this same bill, Mr. President. And speaking of, not necessarily penalties, but Well, when at the proper time, I'd like to ask, or looking forward to that proper time, would the sponsor be willing to accept an amendment ipso facto revoking Smart's franchise should it fail to offer at least 30% of its shares to the public within 2 years from the effectivity thereof, Mr. President?
But you know, I think that there are many considerations here. Of course, as we've already mentioned, that number one, Smart has to comply with the law, but number two, we know that there are many millions of subscribers dependent on it. So I feel that this particular matter, which could be contentious, should be put to a vote if in case you come up with an amendment that we might study.
Yes, Mr. President. So I thank the good sponsor for at least the openness to hear what possible formulation I could come up with in terms of a proposed amendment on this issue of the 30% public offering requirement.
And Mr. President, also to add, in case there's a delay or in case there's a rejection of the franchise, let us also be aware of the reality that we will end up with one telco company in operation. So it's really a matter of deliberating on this properly to make them compliant, but at the same time we should also be very reasonable.
Yes, Mr. President, Madam Sponsor, I do agree about the reasonableness. And speaking of that, I'll jump ahead to a later question, but which is related immediately now to this part of the discussion on the prospect of failing to renew Smart's franchise by March 17 of this year. So its franchise expires on 27th March. However, during the committee hearings, and I did mention this in the second and last hearing, Smart itself mentioned that even if its franchise was not renewed in time, it would still be able to operate using the franchise of Digital Communications Philippines, or Digitel, commonly referred to as SAN. And of course, Madam Sponsor, I'm also concerned about reasonableness because half of my family and friends are using Smart. But just to pursue this question, so is it accurate, in fact, to state that the failure to renew this franchise in time would not automatically be fatal to Smart's business or the services to its subscribers?
Yes, Mr. President, in fact, this is not the penalties or the monetary penalties that might be imposed on them is not so much the concern. Number one, I think that it is, if the Senate can work and manage its time properly and we can comply with the deadline as well, why not? Another thing is, of course, you know that Smart is being held by a publicly listed company, so they also have to, it will be a lot less chaotic if they can get their renewal before then. It may be fatal if not renewed, since Smart will default in its loan obligations, for example. In that particular aspect, then there might be repercussions. I'm saying this because I think that we have the capability in the Senate to pass this. I don't think we should delay any further if it's something that can be done within the time period that they also require.
I agree, Mr. President, Madam Sponsor, that if we can substantively address the issues, then why not renew the franchise in time? And it's precisely for this reason that I'm bringing up some of these substantive issues that I started to raise in the last hearing. And yes, Smart is held by a publicly listed company, but as we discussed earlier, the 30% public offering requirement for Smart itself has yet to be complied with. So just to exhaust the question about the possible failure to renew Smart's franchise by March 17, would Smart be able to use the frequencies assigned to it by the National Telecommunications Commission should its franchise expire?
Yes,
It would, Madam.
Mr. President, I believe so. I don't think we had the NTC present and they did not object to this. Should the unfortunate event that we won't be able to renew it on time.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. And then Smart referred to Digitel's franchise, which is controlled by PLDT Incorporated, Smart's parent company. So would Smart, in fact, be able to use Digital's franchise to conduct its business in the interim that its franchise might expire? Because that was stated by, I believe, yes, Smart itself.
In fact, they will need congressional approval for them to be able to utilize the full digital access franchise.
Yes, Madam Sponsor. And moreover, would Smart be able to use frequencies assigned to Digitel or any other subsidiary of PLDT Incorporated if it got that congressional permission?
With the approval, I believe, of the NTC, they will be able to.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. And lastly, on this issue, what would the effect of an expiration or temporary expiration of Smart's franchise have on Smart's contracts with its subscribers?
Well, Mr. President, we know that, as I've already mentioned, it will be fatal because Smart may default in its loan obligations. But when it comes to the services, of course, they will try to minimize the effect on that. But when there's uncertainty as to the permit of your operations, then they might be sidetracked a little bit. I mean, there are no guarantees, but as a public utility, they will need to continue nonetheless. I think it will also be to all our interests. In fact, half your family, as you mentioned,
Yes.
it is.
Half my friends.
Yeah, that we hope that they can continue their service.
Yes, Madam Sponsor. So going back now to another issue on the infrastructure development plan.
Senator Rivers, with
Yes,
your
Mr.
permission,
President, of course.
so that I can follow your line of questioning. Can I interject the
Certainly,
question?
Mr. President.
What is the critical date? Because in the sponsorship speech of Senator Subiri, he mentioned April, and then we're
No,
talking about March. So can you give
It's
us what
March
is the-
18, Mr. President.
March
I-
18?
No, March 19?
What? Can we fix that date?
Oh, March 27, Mr. President, but since we're going on break, officially on the 18th.
Yes, but the
March
official
27. March
uh,
27.
termination, no? The expiration date of the franchise is March 27, 2017.
Yes.
Yes,
Mr.
Mr.
President,
Senator
just to
Sabin?
correct, yeah, that's why I said that the services of Smart may no longer be availed by April kasi it ends on March 27.
Okay.
So by April,
And may we know the
Possibly.
legal basis, so how come they can continue to operate even in the possibility, in the scenario that the franchise is not renewed by March 27, 2017? Why is the opinion that they can still operate? And what is the legal basis?
1 minute suspension, Mr.
A
President.
minute suspension. Ano yun, Kuya Junior? Paano yun?
So, merong president.
Hindi, nasa original. Tignan nyo, nasa original franchise. Bakit meron mga grace period?
Ito yung president. Here's the house. This is with regards to AT&T. Ready to resume, Mr. President. Yes, sir.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, with regards to your question, what makes them able to continue operation with an expired franchise, if I understand your question correctly? During the 16th Congress, there was a similar situation with PT&T under House Bill number 5601, but it was approved by the committee February 9, 2015, and in third reading last October 9, 2015. Considering the period that a legislative measure takes to get approved, the said grantee's franchise term lapsed last November 2015, but its application for renewal is still within the term of the 16th Congress. So the interpretation of the lower house is that since the franchise expired and is still in the process of renewal within the term of Congress, they were given, I'm sure, some sort of reprieve. Now, when it comes to the legal matter involved here, NTC will still have to allow SMART to operate somehow because it's a public utility and about 70 million subscribers are dependent on it, but they will have to go through a labyrinth of different ways to be able to make this legal. Number one, they'll have to operate under another company that has a franchise. So in this case, I think it will be Digitel. But they will still need congressional approval. So in the period, they're still in limbo. And while they're waiting for approval on that, the customers, in the meantime, cannot be entertained under SMART, but in transition to Digitel. And so all of that information will now be temporarily transferred to Digitel, as I understand, because legally they're the ones that will be holding the interim franchise. So all of that will have to be dealt with because we did not make a deadline. So as much as possible, of course, unless there's a compelling reason not to finish this, I think that it will save us a lot more time because anyway, we're going to have to approve the franchise of Digitel to take on the SMART service. And also, the repercussion is if SMART franchise is not renewed, then effectively they cannot get new subscribers and you will have a monopoly. Only one company then will get the new subscribers in that interim period that SMART is not able to renew their franchise.
Thank you for that answer. Senator Ontiveros, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good sponsor, moving on now to the issue of the infrastructure development plan. So it was noted during our hearings that our internet services in the Philippines are among the slowest and most expensive in Southeast Asia. And one of the reasons cited for this was the inadequacy of our telecommunications infrastructure. Thus, it seems apparent that to provide better services to its subscribers, SMART would need to expedite the rollout and expansion of its current telecommunications infrastructure. So my question, Madam Sponsor, what provisions in the renewed franchise would require SMART to improve its infrastructure for the purpose of providing better service to the public?
Mr. President, in the franchise itself, there's no timeline as to all these projects, but in the NTC and with their agreement with the acquisition of some of the broadband capacity of SMC, they'd have to be able to comply with the rollout within 3 years. Otherwise, they forfeit the extra bandwidth frequencies that they will acquire.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. A last question on this.
Mr. President,
Yes,
if I may
Madam-
add
Mr.
also,
President.
I'm sorry, this will, if they comply within the 3 years, they will be able to service 90% of the municipalities that haven't been serviced. And we also have a provision that the franchise shall give priority to improving and extending its services in areas not yet served and in hazard and typhoon-prone areas, etc. So we also tucked it in the bill itself, but not specific as to the time frame.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor, and I do support your initiatives in this aspect. As a last question, on this topic, would the sponsor be willing to accept at the proper time an amendment requiring SMART to submit an annual infrastructure development plan to Congress as part of the repertorial requirements of its renewed franchise?
Yes. Mr. President, not that I want to have less work, but the NTC is mandated to check up on their deliverables within 3 years. And we have an oversight function, and at any time we feel that NTC is remiss on their obligation to check on this, the good senator from Capiz can certainly request me to call them for, submit a resolution for a hearing with the NTC.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. I will certainly consider that in crafting a proposed amendment. At
And
the
other
proper time.
franchises also do not have this requirement, Mr. President.
And thank you for mentioning that, Madam Sponsor, because in fact, as we look towards coming up with a law that would better regulate the whole industry, there should be nothing to prevent us from considering reflecting some of the provisions in that future law already in the franchises, not just of SMART, but both or eventually all the other telecommunications companies. Moving on now, Madam Sponsor, to the issue of the equality clause. So our substitute bill contains an equality clause granting SMART advantage, favor, privilege, exemption, or immunity granted under existing franchises or which may hereafter be granted by Congress. If we think international trade, this is reminiscent of most favored nation status, whereby a country that has been accorded this status may not be treated less advantageously than any other country, and that's fair. The version approved by our committee also expanded the equality clause from House Bill 4637's by making the same applicable to existing and not just future franchises issued by Congress. So, a question, Madam Sponsor, what was the rationale for the inclusion of this equality clause, this expanded equality clause in the renewed franchise, Mr. President?
Mr. President, the equality clause is there just as a guarantee, as we've also took into consideration the other franchise, the most recent franchise that was issued. So it's also there as a safety measure, although, as you know, we've already we've adopted this policy.
And Madam Sponsor, the equality clause states that it shall neither apply to nor affect provisions of telecommunications franchises, quote, concerning territory covered by the franchise, close quote. The language seems rather ambiguous to me, so what particular franchises would this clause apply to?
Mr. President, this is actually lifted from Republic Act 7925. That's exactly the wording as stated in the law. So, by adopting the equality clause in the Bell franchise, we intend to level the playing field by ensuring that incentives granted by the legislator to other franchises, except with regards to taxes, are given also to other players. However, if the so that's the rationale behind it.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. I'll also move a little later to the issue of tax exemptions, but again, just to exhaust my questions about the equality clause. It should be noted that the equality clause in House Bill 4637 applies specifically to telecommunications franchises. Is the clause in our bill intended to apply to all existing franchises or only to franchises for the same services as offered by SMART?
Well, it's already in Section 23 of RA 7925. Therefore, it will apply to all franchises. But, of course, as in any franchise, one particular provision in this franchise is not necessarily bound the others unless it is an actual law already, in which case it is in RA 7925. So the equality clause only pertains to regulatory incentives and benefits. It does not pertain to tax incentives or other monetary or tax reliefs that Congress may grant to a startup franchisee.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. And because the equality clause covers existing franchises, wouldn't this allow SMART to cherry-pick beneficial provisions from existing franchises?
No, of course not. This is, you have to comply with the law in its entirety.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. Now, referring to an issue that Madam Sponsor referred to partially earlier. So, a duopoly composed of Smart and Globe currently exists in the consumer telecommunications industry. For a third player, or a fourth, a fifth, and more later on, to enter the market and successfully compete, wouldn't its franchise need to contain incentives in its favor?
Yes, we agree. And there are certain tax incentives that may be granted by Congress to a new or third player. That's why a franchise usually, well, of course, a franchise has a duration, because after such duration or after that period, those incentives may be withdrawn by Congress or sooner if Congress stipulates it in their franchise.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. So under this equality clause, meaning for, under this equality clause, would Smart be entitled to enjoy the incentives in any franchise granted later on to a third or fourth or fifth player in the industry?
Not necessarily, because from what I understand, of course, if Smart, one minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Okay. I'm ready, I think.
Session is resumed.
First of all, if Congress gives a franchise to a startup company, if that startup company is suddenly acquired by Smart, it will have to go through a process anyway. And Congress has to approve the acquisition of that franchise by Smart. So if Congress sees that they just obtain the franchise for them to sell it, Congress itself can deny that franchise. So Smart may not necessarily benefit from it if they can't even own it.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. But considering the foregoing, wouldn't it be contemplated that an equality clause would in fact further solidify Smart's dominant market position rather than giving a real fighting chance to compete on a more equal or level playing field to third, fourth, or fifth players down the road?
Well, of course, it's always been an issue for us. Just the fact that there are two of them competing. But the fact is they are there now. Now, we have created the Philippine Competition Commission that will look into any new players that will come in to make sure that they're not merged with another big player. And then I think that the government still has enough, what do you call it now? Broadband. Frequencies left for a third player or a fourth to come in. And that's also part of the reason why San Miguel has left a certain portion out, which is owned by the government, so that another player can come in.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. My last question on the equality clause, although I still have a few other questions. But my last question on the equality clause probably will be the most, stretching it question for today, but why not if we're still in the period of interpellation? And at the proper time, would the sponsor be willing to amend House Bill 4637 by deleting this equality clause provision entirely? Just asking, Madam Sponsor.
Well, if we remove it, we remove the clause, it doesn't affect it because it's still a law. So it's actually just a redundancy, a reinforcement in the franchise also, so that it's an easy reference, I suppose, for the ones that are committed to this franchise.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor, for at least that openness. Well, I take it as an openness to the proposed amendment that I may propose at the proper time. Because, of course, if something is a redundancy, we may still choose to repeat it, or we may not.
We're always open. We should
Thank
always
you.
be.
Thank you, Mr. President and Madam Sponsor. Moving now to what the Madam Sponsor mentioned earlier about tax exemptions. So House Bill 4637 exempts SMART from customs duties, tariffs, and other taxes in connection with radio, telecommunications, and electronic communications equipment, machinery, and spare parts necessary for its business. In addition, the franchise tax of 3% on its gross receipts was also deleted in favor of a value-added tax, which shall be in lieu of any and all taxes imposed by a national or local authority. So, question, Madam Sponsor, with its dominant market position, what's the rationale for granting SMART an exemption from customs duties and tariffs for its equipment and machinery?
Number one, it is within the powers of Congress to grant tax exemptions or tax obligations to a franchisee. And also, there's such a thing as the level playing field. Globe has this in their franchise. So, in fact, SMART has paid an excess of about 300 million just for these other tax provisions that were in their original franchise agreement. Whereas by the time Globe came in, they didn't have to pay all these other taxes. That's why of a ruling also by the Supreme Court.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. I'd also just like to note that Globe's franchise is also up for renewal this year. And so we can work on
No,
improving...
Mr. President. In 2030, you will probably still be a senator by then,
I hope so, Madam Sponsor.
under whatever form of government.
When is it? When is the Globe franchise due?
2030.
2030, 2030.
So if it's that far down the road, Madam Sponsor, then we would have to de facto improve provisions of that franchise of Globe through the passage of a law.
Yes.
Tama ba? The law would, by one of our usual sections towards the end of each bill, each law, would have to supersede
The
existing
franchise
laws,
agreement or...
including, yes,
and
Madam
again,
Sponsor.
it's Congress, within the Congress, powers of Congress to impose new taxes. It could be either an encompassing law and another regulation, but certainly, yes, they will be compliant if it's mandated by Congress.
Yes, Madam Sponsor. So to return to the, yes, to other tax exemptions, similarly, what was the rationale for removing the 3% franchise tax on gross receipts?
Same
reason. Thank you, Madam
Because Globe
Sponsor.
doesn't even have it also,
In
and
its
they've already have. It was repealed by the Internal Revenue Code, Mr. President.
And then, Madam Sponsor, wouldn't the value-added tax just get passed on to consumers, making internet that's already among the most expensive in the region even more expensive?
The value-added tax is apparently not passed on to the customers because, one minute suspension, Mr. President.
Minute suspension. Tama, pakigawan ako ng folder ulit dun sa kaso.
So it's passed on. Mr. President, I stand corrected.
Are you ready to resume?
Yes.
Session is
Ready to
resumed.
resume.
Go
I
ahead,
stand
ma'am.
corrected, Mr. President. What I mean to say is that it is not of the liking of any franchise or any company to pass on the value-added tax to the customers, but this is mandated by law. So they have to comply.
So there's nothing to be done about it, but that a value-added tax is
Everybody
passed on
has to
the
pay
consumer.
value-added tax in this particular industry.
So, in fact, what is the rationale for not taxing SMART like any other Philippine corporation?
They pay other taxes, Mr. President, like corporate income taxes, value-added taxes, Here are a list of taxes that they pay, Mr. President: corporate income tax, doc stamps, VAT, 10% overseas tax, fringe benefit tax, withholding tax, expanded withholding tax, final withholding tax, VAT withholding tax, registration fees, and then local government tax, mayor's permit and business permit, real property taxes, franchise taxes,
Thank you, Madam
local franchise taxes.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. I can anticipate what the good sponsor might respond to this last question on tax exemptions, but I shall ask it anyway for purposes of interpellation. Would the sponsor be willing to amend House Bill 4637 by removing the tax exemptions in SMART's favor? And of course, I'll
Unfortunately,
ask this in the other...
Yes,
hearing
Mr. President,
coming up.
unfortunately, I don't see the reason for it now, especially with the reasons behind it, the equality clause, and all the other taxes that SMART has to pay. I believe that they should probably repay it in better service. I agree with that.
I agree,
But
Madam Sponsor.
taxes, I think, we're one of the highest tax countries in Asia, in fact.
Yes, Madam Sponsor. Thank you. Moving on now to my second to the last cluster of questions on restrictions on transfer of ownership. So SMART's franchise restricts the sale or transfer of a controlling interest in the said corporation to any other entity without the prior approval of Congress. However, the franchise also includes a number of exceptions. So, question, Madam Sponsor, these exceptions allow transfer or sale to a foreign investor or investors. Would the same exception apply in the case of a sale or transfer to local investors? Why does this provision seem to favor the sale of a company operating a public service to foreigners, Mr. President?
They still have to, Mr. President, they still have, as you know, with foreigners, they still have to comply with the 60-40 requirement. So foreigners are not exempt because of the franchise of SMART. They cannot exceed, obviously, ownership beyond the 40% mandated by law.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. These exceptions also allow transfer or sale to another telecommunications franchise holder. Couldn't this facilitate the further consolidation of the industry and perhaps strengthen the existing duopoly rather than open it up to greater competition among more players, Mr. President?
This is found in other franchises, Mr. President. But then, at the time also those other franchises were approved, we didn't have the Philippine Competition Commission then. Now we have that commission that can recommend or they can give their opinion. We need prior approval from them before this is actually made, finalized.
Yes, Madam Sponsor. A clarificatory question next. Because these exceptions are very broad, even including combinations of the exceptions, so parang may permutations pa, what sales or transfers of a controlling interest in SMART are prohibited?
Controlling interest is prohibited without prior approval of Congress. That's the general rule for all franchises, Mr. President.
All right. Thank you, Madam Sponsor. But I just like to note, Madam Sponsor, that when the Philippine Competition Commission tried to do its job, a case was filed against it, and eventually a temporary restraining order issued.
Well, that's all part of the process, Mr. President. But when a transfer is done through a stock exchange, for example, and for purposes of qualifying persons for election to the board are acts or transactions of the franchisee which are no longer to be mentioned in the law, since these are considered done in the ordinary course of franchisee's business. In such instances, government intervention as much as possible should be kept to a minimum. If a transfer is done through a stock exchange, then there are already sufficient regulatory mechanisms in place to ensure the franchisee's compliance. Furthermore, under Clause B, the obligation to ensure that qualified and responsible persons are fit and proper to hold key positions in the company rests upon the grantee or franchisee. For a big company such as SMART, it is reasonable to expect that it complies with the fit and proper best practices, since this applies to regulated institutions as well as the individuals involved in its management and control, board of directors. Hence, there's no need to mention this in the bill.
Well, as for the earlier point raised by Madam Sponsor, fair enough that cases, TROs may come with the current territory. But I guess what that impresses on me, Mr. President, is that we need to therefore pass franchises and eventually a law that better complements the work of bodies like the Philippine Competition Commission to really spur that greater competition and give the state a good hand in terms of regulating industries for the public good.
I agree, Mr. President. That is a good suggestion for a general law to be drafted that will be harmonized with the PCC.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. Last question on the restriction on transfer of ownership. Again, please bear with me just to ask the question. Would the sponsor be willing to consider an amendment returning this clause to the version contained in the original RA 7294?
Yes, Mr. President, that's in our committee report.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor. So to my last set of questions on foreign ownership. So we adverted to it a little earlier. So SMART needs to be at least, as good sponsor said, 60% owned by Filipinos to operate as a telecommunications entity. Since SMART is 100% owned by PLDT Incorporated, then PLDT itself also needs to be Filipino. Just some facts which I think are important. Around 33% of PLDT's capital stock is owned by the following foreign companies: JP Morgan, Hong Kong Limited, NTT Docomo Inc., and NTT Communications Corp. Around 22% of PLDT is owned by Filipino corporations: Philippine Telecommunications Investment Corporation and Metro Pacific Resources Incorporated. PTIC, in turn, is 40% owned by La Rouge BV, apparently a Dutch company, and 60% by Metro Pacific Assets Holding Inc., a Filipino company. Metro Pacific Assets Holdings Inc. is, in turn, 60% owned by Metro Pacific Resources Inc. and 40% by Intalink BV, another Dutch company. Metro Pacific Resources Inc. is, in turn, 60% owned by Metro Pacific Holdings Inc. and 40% by Metro Pacific Investments Limited, a company registered in the Cayman Islands. Metro Pacific Holdings Inc. is in turn 57% owned by Enterprise Investments Holdings Inc., 26.71% by Intalink BV, Dutch, and 13.29% by First Pacific International Limited, a Hong Kong company. Ant Inves Holding Inc. is 60% owned by Pilipinas Pacific Enterprise Holdings Inc. and 40% by First Pacific International Limited, a Hong Kong company. Pilipinas Pacific Enterprise Holdings Inc. is 60% owned by Pilipinas Enterprise Management Holdings Inc. and 40% also by First Pacific Enterprise Holdings BV, the Hong Kong company. And lastly, Pilipinas Enterprise Management Holdings Inc. Is owned by Manny V. Pangilinan, Alfredo S. Panlilio, Victorico P. Vargas, Rene G. Bañez, and Maria Lourdes C. Rausa Chan. So for my last questions, Madam Chair, and on this issue of foreign ownership, what is the current percentage of foreign ownership in PLDT as a whole?
It's we are assured that it's less than 40%, Mr. President. In a very recent Supreme Court case, Roy versus SEC, the SC upheld SEC rules on determination of foreign ownership, and PLDT complies with SEC rules.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What is the current percentage of foreign ownership in Philippine Telecommunications Investment Corp. and Metro Pacific Resources Inc., respectively?
Still 40%.
40% for both, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. Would the percentage of foreign ownership in PLDT be the same if the grandfather rule were applied?
According to the Roy case, the grandfather rule is not applied, Mr. President.
Excuse me, what does that mean? A company which is 60% Filipino and 40% foreign would be treated as if it is 100% Filipino?
Yes,
that's
it's
it.
a control test, Mr. President.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Madam Sponsor. Perhaps the good sponsor would be willing to further verify the foreign ownership in Smart's parent company prior to the renewal of this franchise. We still have some days left to do that, Madam Sponsor.
Yes, Mr. President, with the help of my colleagues here, if they raise some questions regarding that, but we will also get a guarantee from SMART that that they are compliant with this.
Thank you so much, Madam Sponsor. And for my very last question, for my interpellation, lastly, why has PLDT, Smart's parent company, adopted such a, and I just read through some of it, such a convoluted corporate structure with multiple layers of Filipino and foreign entities? I mean,
Well,
shouldn't
Mr.
this lack of
President, I mean,
simplicity raise red flags?
For whatever it is, I mean, we know that in the business of business, we need a lot of different investors. Our structures can be a little bit of a labyrinth, but for as long as they are compliant and for as long as they comply with the rules of the country that they've set up in, the 60-40 rule, the taxes, etc., that's their problem if they want to be convoluted.
All right, Madam Sponsor, fair enough. Thank you very much, Madam Sponsor and Mr. President, and I look forward to working further with the good sponsor in achieving not just the objectives of individual franchises, but really regulating vital national industry better on the part of the state in partnership with the private sector and ultimately for the good of the public. Maraming salamat po.
Mr. President, I'd like to thank Senator Risa for really investing a lot of time studying this franchise bill. We appreciate it that she has spoken also for the rights of the consumers for the service being provided by SMART. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Senator Villanueva, Mr. President, wishes to be recognized.
Senator Villanueva is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Thank you, Mr. President. With the distinguished sponsor yield to very few questions, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, I'm torn with my obligation here in the Senate to finish this, but it is also the special day of my husband, so
I'll be very
Yes,
brief, Mr. President, considering that most of my questions were already asked. I just wanted to put on record that I am one with the distinguished sponsor. I was listening attentively to her sponsorship speech with regard to a lot of issues, especially the compliance of the listing of shares, and that that they will be listed in the Philippine Stock Exchange. But I would just like to dwell on two questions, actually, Mr. President, one of which was already tackled, the exemption on local government taxes. We understand that SMART paid a total of 318,110,063.08 in local government taxes for the year 2016. Considering this large amount, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, does the government have plans on alternative sources of income to make up for these losses? I understand very well, Mr. President, distinguished colleague, that we are giving exemptions to SMART because in the previous franchise law that we passed for Globe, exempted din po sila. Am I correct, Madam Chair?
yes, and yeah, Mr. President, the rationale behind this is the equality clause. We cannot impose certain regulations on one company and not on the other. So, well, yes, we might be able to help the local governments find alternative sources of income to make up for this, but in the interest of equality, we'll have to be able to defer on that.
I agree, Mr. President, distinguished colleague. May I just ask if we have record as to the unpaid local taxes due at this point in time? Because I remember in the last hearing,
a representative from the LGU sector stated that there's about 200 plus million unpaid local taxes. Am I correct, Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. President, they are paying their obligations, but they have a listing of the taxes that they're still paying, like business taxes, some, business taxes, lawyers' permits, and some realty taxes.
Nandito na rin lang sila, Mr. President, distinguished colleague. Outstanding po ba ito, itong sinasabing accounts payable or unpaid local taxes, yung binabanggit po ng mga LGUs na may 200 plus million worth of unpaid taxes. Ang next question ko po, at last question ko na po ito dun sa exemption is, what's gonna happen when we pass this franchise law? With the exemptions, exempt them from paying, Mr. President?
Mr. President, everything that was mandated for them to obligate or to pay during the last franchise, they will have to comply with that. With this one, we'll be moving forward from the date of the franchise, the new franchise is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. That's what I've been waiting to hear from the good sponsor. Last point, Mr. President, we note that even in the previous hearings, this representation received some complaints again from the labor sector, and we note that SMART is currently involved in several labor cases, and in fact, it has been involved in several Supreme Court cases. Would the distinguished lady sponsor amenable, again, Mr. President, just for this representation to be inconsistent with our advocacy, include an amendment that SMART shall comply with applicable labor laws?
Yes, Mr. President, we are very much open to that, as we have in our other franchise deliberation. Anyway, all labor regulations should be complied with by all these companies. So it's almost like a redundancy, but we will put it in the franchise agreement, Mr.
There's no problem about that. Thank you
No
very much,
problem at all.
Mr. President, distinguished colleague. Thank you for your time, and as promised, I'll be very brief. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I pursue a point raised by Senator Villanueva? To help us visualize or appreciate the payments made by SMART, can they give us a listing of all the taxes that you mentioned earlier, plus the permits, plus the amounts, Madam Sponsor? Or maybe for the last 5 years, the amounts per category that they have paid?
Yes,
Is
Mr.
that
President,
possible?
we actually have in our hands right now, I have in my hand right now, a record of the tax remittances from 2012 to 2016.
Yes,
If
okay.
Mr. President, if you'd like
Because
to have a copy
you
now.
enumerated a lot of taxes
Yes.
plus permits. You even mentioned permits and local
Would you like me to read
franchise
them,
tax.
sir, or would you just like to take a look at them? I guess
Maybe if you could give each senator
copy,
to be
yes.
guided during the interpellation. Thank you very much. Majority Leader?
Thank you, Mr. President. May I be recognized to ask the daughter of my dear friend a few questions, if you wish she will favor me with the answers.
yes, Mr. President, how can I refuse? He always uses that card that my father might
There
return
being
to
no-
haunt
there-
me if I don't follow his wishes.
There being no objection, Senator Soto is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I really have a bunch of questions, but I will limit my interpellations to questions that will aid the distinguished lady in informing us, the Senate, on the importance of addressing this particular bill. Mr. President, may we know, and this is the common question by the layman, may we know, as of this month, how many are the active SMART subscribers?
There are 63 million active SMART subscribers, Mr. President.
Na maaaring magalit pag hindi natin binigay yung franchise ng SMART, gano'n.
Kay Senator Miggs magagalit, Mr. President.
Now, currently, how many are SMART's active cell sites in the country?
There are 10,000 sites, Mr. President, SMART sites, but they still obviously need to add more. And they're adding 2,000 more sites in the next 3 years? 3 years.
In the next 3 years. Because, Mr. President, one of the concerns being complained by a lot of consumers, not against Smart, but the entire industry, the telcos, for that matter, is that, well, other than the slow internet speed, is the high cost of internet fees. Can you appraise us as end users on the factors that affect the cost of services?
Well, number one, Mr. President, of course, the cost of service is affected by the demand, the number of subscribers that we have, and then the number of operators. There are only 2 of them to choose from. And our service is also not very efficient in the sense that it's so difficult for them to be able to put up a tower, for example, because of all of the different permits required to be able to erect one tower. They have to, I think there are 15 to 18 permits per tower, and it takes a few months, which is renewable every year, and it costs up to 10 million just to put up one cell site. So all of this adds to the cost of the. That's why this is also part of our emergency powers provision, that we suspend local government powers when it comes to telecommunication infrastructure. Bandwidth costs, new technology costs, network upgrade, but we are cheapest supposedly in data services in Asia, according to an ACAME survey. I don't necessarily believe this, but this is one survey that is was presented.
Well, I'm glad you're placing that on record, Mr. President, because that would answer most of the questions concerning that. Is Smart now doing something or to address what steps have they taken to somehow lessen the cost of their services?
Mr. President, they have a commitment, and they have to comply within 3 years with the NTC to modernize their equipment, to build more infrastructure, to erect more cell sites. This is part of the agreement that granted them the rights to use the frequencies. Keep forgetting that of the SMC deal.
Right. Mr. President, just rewinding back a little, when you mentioned 18 permits from local government
That's what I
units,
hear. Sometimes
to put up a cell site?
actually it's from 20. It's until 25 permits.
This is particularly the reason, yeah.
25 to 30 permits from LGUs for one cell site. Yes, Mr. President.
I overheard the president earlier, sometime back, complaining about such permits. Will this be addressed by one of our bills, the ease of doing business bill that we are taking up? That will be addressed?
Senator Subiri?
Yes, Mr. President, with the majority leader's permission, the ease of doing business will definitely increase, or rather decrease the wait time for many of these businesses applying for local government and national government permits and licenses. So this will definitely help Smart and other communication companies in terms of applying for permits and licenses.
All right, thank you very much. I hope we'll be able to address that. This is sa mga sakit ng ulo natin. And finally, one final question on a thorn on the side of consumers or end users. How many reported cases of text spam or scam have Smart received in the past 2 years? And
I think
and
this
if they are receiving such reports, what are the measures that they are doing to prevent these text scams or spams?
Mr. President, when Smart receives a text spam or any complaint regarding fraud, they have to report this to the NTC. The NTC then has the mandate to be able to act on this, so they will either try to direct Smart to deal with their customers, or they themselves will have to resolve the issue? This is just for the month of January, Mr. President. The customer complaints on an average, but this includes both lost phones, data connectivity. It's about 53,475. So 27, around roughly 28,000 on technical issues like data connectivity, service downtime, and 26,000 on billing, credit dispute. Now, when we say 53,000 out of millions of subscribers, it looks small. But then you and I know, Mr. President, that if we have an issue with the telcos, we don't always complain because of the time involved. So I'm sure this is probably times 100%, but it would still be less. I mean, considering their subscribers are how many again? 63 million,
63 million.
Mr. President.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'd like to thank the distinguished lady for answering our questions. I have no further questions. I move that we recognize Senator Sherwin Gatchalian.
Before I recognize
final
Senator Gatchalian,
interpolator.
can I interject one question about taxes with the permission of the sponsor?
Yes, Mr. President.
Is SMART asking for this exemption from customs duties, tariffs, and other taxes mentioned in Section 4 of the bill?
Yes, Mr. President, that's also in the Globe franchise when
Okay.
it comes to equipment.
So
Mr.
just to equalize?
Yes, in fact,
Okay.
they're not exempt right now, so they've actually been paying for that.
Is there a legal obstacle if we remove the exemption of both?
No, because it's in the power of Congress. So if Congress decides to, then yes,
So,
as a general law.
so policy decision is we can grant this to SMART to equalize the playing field, or we can remove it from Globe to equalize the playing field. Even if, so that means we can introduce a bill which
Yes, Mr.
amends
President,
the
of course.
franchise of Globe, which expires in 2030 still, so that this benefit that it is allegedly enjoying, which SMART wants also to have, will be withdrawn from the
Yes,
Globe
Mr.
franchise. Is that
President.
possible?
As a general law, yes, especially when we need to rationalize all of the incentives that we are giving. If it's proposed by the DOF and Congress finds it reasonable, but it has to be on a general law, Mr. President.
Yeah, because SMART is an established company. I don't think it needs this preferential treatment of duties exemption. What is the position of the sponsor?
Well, it can be repealed, Mr. President, by a general law, but it also has to, with our equality clause, I think that a similar company of the
Okay.
same status should also not benefit from
So,
that incentive.
Is your point that when we pass the SMART franchise, we let this remain or stay, and we can subsequently pass a bill
Yes.
withdrawing from both SMART and Globe such a concession?
Or any other telecommunications company.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
from all
As of now-
telecommunication companies. Okay.
Yes, Mr. President, because as of now, we just want to equalize the playing field and later enact a general law. Unless we
So-
can enact a general law ahead of this, which I doubt.
Yes, so SMART doesn't mind a bill of that nature will be filed tomorrow. That's not questionable
the
to SMART, because SMART is not after the exemption. Is that
The
correct?
feedback that I have now is, Mr. President, that what their main concern is a level playing field.
Yeah.
If their competitor is not accorded the same privilege, then they don't mind having to not have that as well.
I think that's very clear, so thank you very much. Senator Gatchalian is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. President, I just have a few questions to ask the good sponsor. Mr. President, is the good sponsor familiar with the mobile number portability?
I was surprised by the good senator from Valenzuela about this, and I am excited about it if it's possible for them to do that.
Right. Mr. President, I just want to quickly ask the good sponsor, and maybe with the assistance of the people from SMART, how do you define the number portability?
1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
A minute suspension.
No, just tell me. It's, you can take the number wherever you want. Okay, can you do it?
Right now,
You have the technological
because it needs a regulation to be passed by the NTC.
But if it's passed, we have the technology.
We will have to invest
Acquire
in the
it.
technology.
Okay. Okay. Mr. President, oh.
Chairman, kayo muna.
Hindi, naisip ko yan. We work something.
Once the law and the regulations, all them.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed. Go ahead, please.
Mr. President, in answer to the question of the senator from Valenzuela, right now, there needs to be a general law that will require them to have this portability. They don't have the technology yet, but they are willing to invest on it, and it is possible to have it if there is a law. So yes, in answer to that question, I think that it will convenience many of us who are stuck and I think it will also improve service because everybody would want to keep the customers who are hesitant to move just because they don't want to lose their number.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I just want to inquire from the good sponsor if she knows how many countries are already implementing mobile number portability.
No, in fact, I'm not very familiar with it. Perhaps the good senator from Valenzuela can enlighten us.
All right. Mr. President, just for the information of the body, there are about 113 countries implementing number portability already. And in the last 5 years, let me just name a few of the countries: Colombia, Ghana, Kenya, Chile, Bermuda, Nigeria, Sudan. This year, Vietnam is already in the middle of implementing their number portability service. I mentioned third world countries because I just want to emphasize that even African countries are already implementing such technology, and their consumers and telecom consumers are already enjoying mobile number portability in their own respective countries. Mr. President, I just want to also ask the good sponsor if this technology is possible with the smart network.
Mr. President, according to the smart directors, it is possible.
And there's no technological prohibition in terms of implementing number portability.
As long as we mandate them to do it, they will be able to acquire technology and they're willing to invest in it. Of course, they need a little prodding by way of a law. Otherwise, I mean, this is self-preservation, let us admit. That they'd rather not have that because if we're sick of their service, we can easily move to another one and keep our numbers. That's the reason why some of us stay with one particular network provider. Mr. President.
Senator Gordon, what's
Yes,
the
with
pleasure?
permission of both senators, I wonder if I may interject that the suggestion of portability, along with other things such as emergency numbers that should be allowed by and utilized by all franchisees, might be better off in a telecommunications law which would mandate all these things. As a franchise, I don't think we would have to do it and again and again. And I actually spoke with the good gentleman that we would author a law to that effect, a bill to that effect. That's all I wanted to say.
Mr. President, just my last question is, why do we need a special law to implement number portability? Can we just, since we're talking about amending the franchise and franchise is a law, no? Is it possible that we can just include this service to the franchise?
Well, Mr. President, I mean, we will appeal to their good heart to do it, but then we won't have any penalties in place in case they refuse us. And also, the NTC, if they make this into a requirement, they'll have to require all the others also. So it needs an NTC regulation and a clearinghouse to cover all players.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, at a later time, I would, with the permission of the good sponsor, I would suggest some amendments to precisely let our consumers enjoy the power to bring our own numbers in case of transferring to other networks. In other countries, the cell phone numbers are treated as state-owned. The state or the country owns the number. It's not owned by the telcos or the telephone companies. It's owned by the state, given to them to be used for the consumers. With that philosophy, Mr. President, I think we can, my suggestion is to introduce an amendment to enable us, all of us, to bring our own cell phone numbers to whatever network. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you,
good
Mr.
sponsor.
President.
Mr. Chairman, just as a point of information, I support the portability suggestion, but like I said, there would be more leverage in a national law that will cover that, including a government clearing center, so that everybody will be on the same page on that one, Your Honor. And again, like I said, I offer
our support to the gentleman from Valenzuela and the gentle lady so that we could do this faster. Thank you.
Senator Gatchalian already filed a bill, Senate Bill number 1237, to that effect. Majority Leader?
Mr. President, I move to close the period of interpellation for House Bill 4637 under Committee Report 43.
In our agenda, the name of Senator Cayetano is listed down, Majority Leader.
I was informed that he will no longer interpellate, perhaps in the period of amendment.
Is there
individual
any
amendments.
objection to close the period of interpellation? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend consideration of House Bill 4637 under Committee Report number 43.
Any objection? There being none, motion is approved. Saan mo nakuha to? Iba tuloy. Mas magaan kasi dapat mabigat. Minute suspension.
Re-open natin yung sa GMA na nakalimutan namin. Yeah, re-open. Oo. Papasahin natin yun. Oo, ngayon.
Sige. It's just increasing the time between national elections.
Sabihin mo na rin sa kanila para hindi na magtano. Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Thank you. Mr. President, the chairman of the Committee on Public Services has just informed me a bit of a problem, so I will try to resolve the problem. There was an amendment that was omitted in House Bill 4631. So, to facilitate the matter, I move to resume consideration of House Bill 4631 under Committee Report number 36. This is the GMA network franchise, Mr. President. And to avoid,
So what is the motion, sir, to...
I move to resume, I'm sorry, not resume. I move to reconsider the passage of GMA network franchise as House Bill 4631 on second reading.
Can I ask for a suspension? Session is suspended. Paano gagawin mga tao?
It's on the table. We can only hope.
Session is resumed. The motion is to reconsider the approval on second reading of House Bill number 4631 under Committee Report number 36. Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of individual amendments. House Bill 4631.
Any objection to reopen the period for individual amendments for this measure? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, may we again recognize the sponsor of the Committee on Public Services, Senator Grace Poe, and that the Majority Leader will be recognized to introduce an individual amendment that was sponsored by Senator Lacson, Mr. President.
Senator Poe and the Majority Leader are recognized.
Thank you. Will the distinguished sponsor accept an amendment?
What page? Page 3A. Lines 19A to 19N. 3A.
On page 3A, from 19A to 19N, replace the entire paragraph with the following. Public service time referred herein shall be equivalent to 10% in words and numbers of the paid commercials or advertisements which shall be allocated based on need to the executive, legislative, judiciary, constitutional commissions, and international humanitarian organizations duly recognized by statute, semicolon, provided that the National Telecommunications Commission, NTC, shall increase the public service time in case of emergency or calamity, period. The NTC shall issue rules and regulations for this purpose, the effectivity of which shall commence upon applicability with other similarly situated broadcast network franchise holders, period.
I accept, Mr. President.
Any objection to the amendment? Anand din? Any objection? There being none, the amendment is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to close the period of individual amendments.
Any objection? There being none, we close the period for individual amendments.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading House Bill 4631.
Any objection? There being none, we approve on second reading House Bill number 4631.
Mr. President, I move to suspend the session for a few minutes.
Session is suspended. Anyari? Ano ba sinabi niya? Tanggalin na yung...
Wala rin yung mga interpelators mo.
Pwedeng bukas po.
I-schedule ko
Si Joel bukas daw. Dalawa lang mag-interpret.
So we know what we...
Public service time. So, tanggal na yung whatever past din na yun.
Because the hearing was continuous. Kasi nasabi ko para sa bahay, I allowed na there was a prejudice statement made. I made a change. I forced their change because natakot siya eh.
Maganda naman pinasok in terms of emergency and calamity.
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, if you will recall, sometime back, if I'm not mistaken, it was Wednesday, Senator Dick Gordon, chairman of the Committee on Justice and Human Rights in the Blue Ribbon, chairman of the Public Accountability of Public Officers, reported out in his committee report 3 bills, and these 3 bills were then thereafter referred to 2 different committees. Now, after consultation with the chairman of these committees, particularly the Committee on Public Services, Senator Grace Poe,
And public order.
and the Committee on Public Order, Senator Lacson, I move that we transfer the referral of Senate Bill 221 and 1128 from the Committee on Public Services to the Committee on Rules to be able to address the particular question of Senator Richard Gordon, Mr. President.
Any objection to the motion to transfer the referral of Senate Bill number 221 and Senate Bill number 1128 to the Committee on Rules? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, in the same line, after consultation with the chairman of the Committee on Public Order, I move to transfer the referral of Senate Bill 1275 from the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs to the Committee on Rules.
Yes.
Any objection to the change in referral of Senate Bill number 1275, which will now be referred to the Committee on Rules?
Thank you,
There
Mr.
being
President.
none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, just a manifestation for the request. There is a request of Senator Chis Escudero to manifest that Senator Bam Aquino and Senator J.B. Ejercito be made additional vice chairs of the Committee on Education, Arts and Culture, Mr. President.
So the
For the
manifestation is noted.
Mr. President, may I move for a few minutes of suspension?
Session is suspended.
We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
After looking over the referrals to the Committee on Rules, Mr. President, as Chair of the Committee on Rules, I move that we refer Senate Bill 221 and Senate Bill 1128 and Senate Bill 1275 to the Committee on Justice and Human Rights.
There is a motion made by the Committee on Rules Chair to refer Senate Bill numbers 221, 1128, 1275 to the Committee on Justice and Human Rights. Any objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Tuesday, March 7, 2017.
Any objection? 7, 2017. Enough na yung mic.